Part 1. A Mysterious Forest. At sunset, young Goodman Brown stepped into the street of Salem Village. But then he put his head back inside his house and kissed his young wife, Faith. She put her pretty head outside the house. The wind played with the pink ribbons in her hair while she called her husband.
"Dearest love,"
she said,
"please leave in the morning and sleep in your own bed tonight. Please stay with me tonight, dear husband."
"My love and my Faith,"
answered young Goodman Brown,
"tonight I must stay away from you. I must make this journey between now and sunrise."
"I will wait for you to return,"
said Faith with her pink ribbons.
"Say your prayers, dear Faith, and go to bed early. Then nothing will happen to you."
The young man walked on and then looked back. He saw Faith's head with her pink ribbons. She was still looking at him.
"Poor little Faith,"
he thought.
"I should not leave her alone while I go on this journey. She often talks of dreams. When she spoke to me, there was unhappiness in her face. Perhaps a dream told her what I am doing tonight. Oh, but it will kill her to think of it. She is an angel, and after tonight I will stay close to her forever."
With this excellent resolution for the future, Goodman Brown felt better. He walked quickly toward his evil purpose. He took a dark, mysterious road in the forest with tall, dark trees all around him. It was very lonely, and he did not know what was hidden behind the dark trees.
"There could be an Indian behind every tree,"
said Goodman Brown to himself. He was afraid. He looked behind him and said,
"What if the devil is here?"
On the road in front of him, there was a man sitting under an old tree. He got up and said, "You are late, Goodman Brown." Surprised by his sudden appearance, he replied nervously,
I was with Faith."
It was now very dark in the forest. The second traveler was about 50 years old, and looked a lot like Goodman Brown. They looked like father and son, but although the older man was simply dressed, he had a certain air of one who knew the world. He would be comfortable at the governor's table or at King William's court. But the only unusual thing about him was his staff. It was a strange staff. It looked like a living serpent. Of course, it was probably Goodman Brown's imagination, because it was very dark in the forest. "Come, Goodman Brown," cried his fellow traveler. "You are walking too slowly. Take my staff if you are tired."
"My friend,"
said Goodman Brown, stopping,
"I met you here because I promised. But now I want to return home because I am worried about this journey."
"Really?" replied the older companion. "Let us walk on. If I can convince you while we walk, then you must not go back. And if I cannot convince you, then you can go back. We have just entered the forest." Goodman Brown started walking again.
"My father never went to the forest on such a journey, and neither did his father before him. We are a family of honest men and good Christians. I will be the first Brown that ever took this path in the forest, and had such
friends, that's what you wanted to say," said the older man. "I have known your family very well. I knew your grandfather and your father. I helped your grandfather when he whipped the Quaker woman in Salem, and I helped him to burn an Indian village. They were my good friends, and we walked along this path many times, and returned after midnight."
"I am surprised that they never spoke about these things, but I can understand why. We are a people of prayer and work, and we do not tolerate evil."
"Evil or not," said the traveler with the staff, "I know many important people here in New England. Religious men, government officials, and the governor himself.
Really?
Cried Goodman Brown.
I don't know the governor or government officials, but if I continue this journey, how can I meet the eye of that good old man, our minister at Salem Village? His voice will make me tremble.
Until now, the older traveler had listened seriously, but he suddenly started laughing loudly. He laughed violently, and his serpent-like staff seemed to move. "Ha, ha, 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 ha!" he shouted again and again. Then he said, "Well, go on, Goodman Brown, go on, but please don't kill me with laughing."
To end the discussion,
said Goodman Brown angrily,
there is my wife, Faith. It will break her dear little heart.
"If that is the case," answered the other, "then go home, Goodman Brown. I don't want anything bad to happen to Faith." On the path in front of them, they saw an old lady who had taught Goodman Brown catechism when he was a child. She was still his spiritual teacher, together with the minister and Deacon Gookin.
"How strange that Goody Cloyes is in the forest tonight,"
said Goodman Brown.
"With your permission, my friend, I will take another path through the woods and leave this Christian woman behind. I don't want to meet her. She may ask me where I am going."
"Very well," said the older traveler. "You go on through the woods, and I will walk on the path." The young man turned into the woods, but watched his companion, who walked along the path. The old lady was walking along quickly for a woman of her age. The traveler touched her neck with his staff.
"The devil!"
screamed the old lady. "It's your old friend," said the traveler.
"Ah, of course it is you, your worship. Yes, it is really you, and in the image of Goodman Brown's grandfather,"
cried the old woman.
"Well, I was ready for the meeting, but I had no horse to ride on. My broomstick has disappeared. I think the witch Goody Corey stole it, so I decided to come on foot. If you give me your arm, we will be there shortly."
"I cannot give you my arm," answered her friend, "but here is my staff." He threw it on the ground, and Goodman Brown thought that the staff took the form of a serpent, but he wasn't sure. First he looked up, and then he looked down, and he did not see Goody Cloyes or the serpent-like staff. All he saw was his fellow traveler, who was waiting for him calmly.
"That old woman taught me catechism,"
said young Goodman Brown, and there was a world of meaning in that simple comment. They continued walking in the forest and talking. The older traveler broke the branch of a tree and used it as a walking staff. Suddenly Goodman Brown sat down under a tree and refused to continue.
"My friend,"
he said,
"I have decided that that horrible old woman can go to the devil if she wants. I always thought she wanted to go to heaven. That is not a reason to leave my dear Faith and follow her."
The older traveler said calmly, "Sit here and rest. When you want to continue, here is my staff to help you." He threw his companion the staff and disappeared into the dark forest. Goodman Brown sat there for a few moments. He was proud of himself because he had a clean conscience, and he could look Deacon Gookin straight in the eye. And that night he could sleep in Faith's arms, instead of spending the night in the forest. As he was thinking these pleasant thoughts, he heard the sound of horses along the path. He decided to hide in the forest. Part 2. A Terrifying Discovery. Goodman Brown did not recognize the men on the horses, because it was too dark. However, he thought he heard the voices of the minister and Deacon Gookin. The voice that sounded like the deacon's said,
I can't miss tonight's meeting. There will be people of our community from Falmouth and others from Connecticut and Rhode Island, and there will be Indian men of magic who know a lot about devilry. There will also be a lovely young woman who will join our group.
"Very well, Deacon Gookin," replied the old minister. "Let us go quickly. We must not be late." The horses galloped through the forest. Goodman Brown was very surprised, and his heart was heavy. He looked up at the sky to see if there was a heaven above him. He saw the sky and the bright stars.
With heaven above and faith below, I will resist the devil,
cried Goodman Brown. While he looked up at the sky and prayed, he saw a black cloud directly above him. From the black cloud he heard the sound of confused voices. They sounded like the voices of his own townspeople. Then he heard the sad voice of a young woman.
"Faith!"
shouted Goodman Brown, who was very worried, and the forest echoed.
"Faith, faith, 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 faith."
The cries of anger and terror filled the night. Then there were sounds of other voices, terrible screams and laughter. The black cloud passed over his head, and something fell down slowly. It was a pink ribbon.
"My faith is gone,"
he cried.
"Oh, there is no good in this world. This world belongs to the devil."
Young Goodman Brown was desperate. He took his staff and started walking very quickly. The road became darker and more frightening. There were strange, terrible sounds everywhere.
"Ha!
cried Goodman Brown when the wind laughed at him.
You can't frighten me! Come witch, come wizard, come the devil himself. Here comes Goodman Brown. He's not afraid of you."
In all the mysterious forest, the figure of Goodman Brown was the most frightening. He went forward courageously as he listened to a strange chorus of human voices. Then suddenly he reached an opening in the forest. The opening looked like an altar. It was surrounded by burning trees that looked like candles. The red light of the fire was everywhere.
"What a strange group,"
said Goodman Brown. In this group there were ministers, church members of Salem Village, pious ladies, important men of the government, and young girls. Good old Deacon Gookin was there, too. However, among these good people there were also thieves, criminals, and bad people. They were all together.
"But where is faith?"
thought Goodman Brown nervously. He heard a hymn. It was a slow, sad hymn about dark sins and evil. The chorus sang, and a loud organ played. Everyone was singing to the devil. It was an image of horror. Then suddenly a voice cried, "Bring in the converts!" When he heard this, Goodman Brown approached the group, and he felt evil. He thought he was his dead father calling him. Then he saw a sad woman who put out her hand to warn him. Was she his mother? Then the old minister and Deacon Gookin took his arm and brought him forward. A thin woman with a veil on her face walked between Goody Cloyce, the pious catechism teacher, and Martha Carrier, an evil woman. Martha Carrier wanted to become the queen of hell. The converts stood there surrounded by the fire. "Welcome, my children," said the dark figure. "You have now found your true nature and your destiny. My children, look behind you." They turned around and saw the fire. There was a strange smile on every dark face. "All the people you knew and respected are here. You thought they were better than you, but they are all here worshipping me," said the dark figure. "Tonight you will know all their darkest secrets. You will know that respected men of the church have said evil words to young girls, that pious women have poisoned their husbands, and that young men have killed their fathers to get their money. You will understand the mystery of sin and evil, and now, my children, look at each other." They all looked at each other. Suddenly Goodman Brown saw Faith, and she saw her husband. "Remember, evil is the nature of all people. Evil must be your only happiness. Welcome again, my children."
Welcome,
repeated the devil worshippers. Young Goodman Brown and Faith stood among the others. They seemed undecided. Did they want to go on? Goodman Brown looked at his wife, and she looked at him.
"Faith, Faith!"
cried Goodman Brown.
"Look up to heaven and resist the devil."
He did not know if Faith obeyed him. After he had spoken, he found himself alone with the sound of the wind in the forest. He was standing against a cold, humid rock. A branch of a tree that had been on fire was now cold and wet. The next morning, young Goodman Brown walked slowly in Salem village. He was a very confused man. He saw the good minister walking near the cemetery and preparing his sermon. Goodman Brown avoided the old man. Old Deacon Gookin was praying, and Goodman Brown could hear his prayers through the open window.
"Who is he praying to?"
thought Goodman Brown. Goody Cloyce, the pious old Christian, was giving religious instruction to a little girl. Goodman Brown pulled the little girl away. Near the church he saw Faith's head with the pretty pink ribbons. She was very happy to see her husband, and almost kissed him in front of the whole village. But Goodman Brown looked at her severely and sadly, and walked on. Did Goodman Brown fall asleep in the forest, and only have a terrible dream about a witch meeting and the devil? Perhaps, but it was a dream of evil omen for young Goodman Brown. After that strange night, he became a sad, dark, almost desperate man. On Sunday, when the congregation sang a hymn, he could not listen to it. He could still hear the frightening hymn of the night in the forest. At night, he often awoke and moved away from Faith. When the family prayed, he looked at them angrily and turned away. After a long life, Goodman Brown's body was carried to his grave, followed by Faith, his children, and grandchildren. There was a procession with many friends, but there were no hopeful words on his tombstone, because his last hour was very sad and hopeless. The Birthmark. Part 1. A Beautiful Young Woman. During the last part of the 18th century, there lived a man of science. One day he left his laboratory because he had found a beautiful young woman who became his wife. Almer loved his young wife very much, but his real passion was science and the mysteries of nature. One day, very soon after their marriage, Almer stared at his wife with a worried expression.
"Georgiana,"
he said,
"did you know that the mark on your cheek can be eliminated?"
No, I didn't.
she said, smiling.
People have called it a charm, and I believed it.
"Perhaps on another face it could be a charm, but not on yours. No, dearest Georgiana, your beauty is almost perfect. But I hate that birthmark."
You hate it?
exclaimed Georgiana, who started crying.
Then why did you marry me? You cannot love me if you hate my birthmark.
In the center of Georgiana's left cheek there was a strange red mark. It had the shape of a very tiny human hand. In the past, young men had liked the tiny hand. They said a fairy had put her tiny hand on her beautiful cheek. Some envious young women said that it destroyed Georgiana's beauty. Before their marriage, Almer did not think about the birthmark, but now it had become a frightening obsession. Georgiana's beauty was almost perfect, and he could not tolerate this defect. It was an imperfection of nature. It was nature's way of showing that we are only mortals. Their happiness was ruined by this birthmark. When Almer woke up in the morning and opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was Georgiana's crimson mark. When they sat together by the fire in the evening, his eyes always looked at the birthmark on Georgiana's cheek. It was the mark of her imperfection. Georgiana shuddered when Almer looked at her, and the pink color of her cheeks turned white, and the little red hand became more evident. It looked like a red ruby on a white stone. Late one night, Georgiana said,
"My dear Almer, do you remember anything about a dream you had last night? A dream about this horrible little hand?"
"No, I don't,"
replied Almer, who was surprised, but then he added coldly,
"Maybe I did dream about it, because before sleeping I thought about the hand."
"And you dreamed about it?"
continued Georgiana, who was almost crying.
"It was a terrible dream. How can you forget it? How can you forget this sentence? It is in her heart now, and we must take it out. Do you remember the dream?"
Almer now remembered his dream. He dreamed that he was with his servant Aminadab. He was trying to remove the red birthmark. But as his knife went deeper into the cheek, the little hand went deeper and deeper. At last the little hand caught Georgiana's heart, and Almer wanted to cut it away. When he remembered the dream clearly, Almer felt ashamed. The truth often comes out in our dreams. Until now, he did not realize that the birthmark had had a terrible influence on him.
"Almer,"
continued Georgiana seriously,
"what can we do to eliminate this birthmark? Maybe it will cause a deformity, or perhaps the mark is as deep as life. But can we eliminate it forever?"
"Dearest Georgiana, I have thought about this a lot, and I am sure it can be eliminated."
"Oh, then please do it. I am not afraid of the risk, because life with this birthmark is awful. Either eliminate it, or take my life. You are a great man of science. All the world knows you. I am certain that you can do it. Please save me from madness."
"My dear wife,"
cried Almer,
"don't worry. I have thought about this problem very much. I am certain that I can make your cheek as perfect as the other. I know I can correct this error of nature, and my happiness will be great."
"Then the problem is solved,"
said Georgiana. Her husband kissed her right cheek, which was perfect. The next day, Almer told his wife about his plan.
"We will both live in the apartment which I used as a laboratory when I was young."
He had made important discoveries in that laboratory, and he had learned about the mysteries of nature and the universe. Georgiana was frightened when Almer took her to the apartment. He looked at her happily, but the birthmark on her white cheek made him shudder, and Georgiana fainted.
"Aminadab! Aminadab!"
shouted Almer violently. A short, robust man with long hair came out of another room. This strange man had been Almer's assistant for many years. He did not understand scientific principles, but he followed instructions and did his job well.
"Georgiana has fainted! Quickly, open the door and burn a special candle,"
cried Almer.
"Yes, master,"
answered Aminadab, looking at poor Georgiana. Then he said to himself,
"He should never eliminate that birthmark."
Almer was at his wife's side when she woke up.
"Where am I? Oh, I remember,"
said Georgiana quietly, and she put her hand over her cheek to hide the terrible mark from her husband's eyes.
"Don't be afraid, dear Georgiana,"
he said.
"It will be a pleasure to remove it."
Oh, please do not look at it again. I can never forget that terrible shudder.
To help Georgiana forget her problem, Almer tried to entertain her. He showed her a little plant that grew slowly before her eyes. When a lovely flower appeared, Georgiana exclaimed,
It's magic! I won't touch it.
"No, you can touch it. Pick the flower and enjoy its perfume."
But when Georgiana touched the flower, the plant died immediately, and its leaves became black. Then Almer decided to create her portrait on a piece of metal. He used a scientific process that he had invented. The result was frightening, because the portrait was difficult to see, but the birthmark was clearly visible. Almer was angry and threw the piece of metal away. He soon forgot these failures, and continued studying science and making experiments. He often went to Georgiana and told her about the mysteries of science and about the history of alchemy. He told her that science could do many incredible things, and it could easily remove the little hand from her cheek. When Almer mentioned the birthmark, Georgiana was always very unhappy. Almer worked many hours in his laboratory with the help of Aminadab. One day he showed his wife a small crystal ball.
What is this?
Asked Georgiana, looking at the small crystal ball with a gold-colored liquid.
It is very beautiful. It looks like the potion of life.
In one sense it is. It is the potion of immortality. It can prolong life or destroy life.
Why do you keep such a terrible potion?
Asked Georgiana in horror.
"Oh, don't worry, dearest Georgiana,"
replied Almer.
"Look at this powerful cosmetic for the skin."
Are you going to use it on my cheek?
Asked Georgiana.
"Oh, no. Your cheek needs something that will go deeper, much deeper."
When she looked in the mirror and saw the red birthmark, she hated it more than anything. Part 2. Perfection is dangerous. While Almer worked in his laboratory, Georgiana looked at the books in his library. They were books by scientists, poets, and philosophers. But the most interesting work was a big book written by her husband, in which he wrote down every experiment of his scientific career. The book was the history of his intense and ambitious life. As Georgiana read it, she loved Almer more and more. She knew he was a great scientist. However, many of his experiments were failures, and this made her very sad. One day she put her face on the open book and started crying. When Almer entered the room and saw her, he said,
"It is dangerous to read a wizard's books."
Now that I have read this book, I adore you more than ever,
said Georgiana.
"Ah, but wait for this success,"
he said,
"and then adore me if you want. But now I would like to hear your beautiful voice. Please sing to me, my dearest."
So Georgiana sang, and Almer was very pleased. Then he returned to his laboratory. But Georgiana had forgotten to tell her husband about a strange sensation she had felt on her left cheek for the last 2 or 3 hours. So she entered into her husband's laboratory for the first time. The first thing she noticed was the furnace with its intense fire. All around the room there were tubes, cylinders, and other scientific instruments. The air was filled with strange vapors and odors. But what really surprised her was Almer himself. He was as pale as death and worried as he prepared a strange new potion. He was so different from the man she had seen a few moments before.
"Carefully, Aminadab, carefully!"
he cried.
"This is a very important moment."
"Ho, ho!" said Aminadab. "Look, master, look!" Almer raised his eyes quickly and became very angry when he saw Georgiana. He went to her and took her arm.
"Why did you come here? Don't you trust your husband?"
He cried angrily.
"Now go away!"
No, Almer.
Said Georgiana firmly.
You don't trust me, and you don't tell me your worries about this experiment. I will accept all the risks.
"No, no, Georgiana,"
said Almer impatiently.
I will drink any potion you give me. I trust you completely.
"My dear wife,"
said Almer,
"you must know that this red hand is deep inside you. There could be danger."
Danger? There is only one danger, that this horrible birthmark remains on my cheek.
cried Georgiana.
Remove it, or we will both go mad.
"Your words are very true,"
said Almer sadly.
"And now, please go back to your rooms. The potion will soon be tested."
When Georgiana returned to her rooms, she thought about Almer's noble character and his great love for her. He wanted her to be perfect because he loved her so much. Her thoughts were interrupted by Almer's footsteps. He carried a glass with a bright, colorless, transparent liquid. He was pale, but didn't seem worried or afraid.
"This potion is perfect,"
he said, looking at Georgiana.
"It cannot fail."
My dearest Almer, life has become very difficult. I think death is the best solution for me.
"But why do you speak of death? The potion cannot fail. Look at its effect on this plant."
Near the window there was an old geranium plant. Its leaves were yellow and ugly. Almer poured a small quantity of the potion in the plant. After a short time, the ugly yellow leaves became green.
I did not need any proof,
said Georgiana quietly.
I believe you. Give me the potion. I am happy to drink it.
"Drink then, my dearest wife. Soon your body will be as perfect as your spirit."
Georgiana drank the potion and gave Almer the empty glass.
It is like water from a magic fountain. Now, dearest Almer, let me sleep.
She fell asleep almost immediately. Almer sat by her side and watched her very carefully. He often looked at the birthmark on her white cheek. At first it was very visible. Then it slowly disappeared.
"It's almost gone,"
said Almer to himself.
"Success! Success! But Georgiana is so pale."
He heard his servant laugh. He too was delighted. Almer looked at Aminadab and said,
"You served me well. Heaven and earth have done their part. The experiment is a success, Aminadab!"
These exclamations disturbed Georgiana's sleep. She opened her eyes and looked in the mirror. She smiled weakly when she saw that the little red hand had almost disappeared. Then she looked at Almer. She was worried.
My poor Almer,
she said quietly.
"Poor? No! I am the richest and happiest man, and you are my splendid wife. Now you are perfect."
My poor Almer,
she repeated lovingly.
You have done your best. Your intention was very noble, but now I am dying.
It was true. The fatal hand was linked to Georgiana's life. When it disappeared, Georgiana's life disappeared too, and so she died. Almer had wanted perfection, but he did not realize that perfection was not part of this world. And so he lost the woman he loved and destroyed his happiness forever. Dr. Heidegger's Experiment. Part 1. Dr. Heidegger's Friends. Dr. Heidegger was a very unusual old man. One afternoon, he invited 4 friends to meet him in his study. There were 3 very old gentlemen, Mr. Medbourne, Colonel Killigrew, and Mr. Gascoigne. And there was a very old lady called Widow Wycherley, They were all very sad people who had been unfortunate in life. However, their biggest misfortune was their age. When Mr. Medbourne was young, he was a rich merchant, but he had lost everything during a bad business transaction. Now he was very poor. Colonel Killigrew had thrown away his best years, his health, and his money in sinful pleasures. Now his mind and body were tormented. Mr. Gascoigne had been a bad man and a dishonest politician. Fortunately, time had passed, and people had forgotten him. Widow Wycherley had been a great beauty when she was young, but for many years now she had lived in seclusion and solitude because of certain terrible stories about her. During their youth, each of the three gentlemen had been in love with Widow Wycherley. They had almost killed each other for the woman they loved.
My dear friends,
Dr. Heidegger said,
please sit down. I would like you to observe a little experiment.
Dr. Heidegger's study was an unusual place. It was a dark, old room with cobwebs. On the walls there were bookcases with many important books. On one bookcase there was a statue of Hippocrates. People said that Dr. Heidegger talked to Hippocrates when he had a difficult medical problem to solve. In a dark corner of the study, inside a small closet, there was a human skeleton. Between the two bookcases there was a tall mirror. People also said that the doctor's dead patients looked at him from this mirror. On the opposite side of the room there was a big portrait of a young lady dressed in a magnificent dress. When the doctor was young, he loved her and wanted to marry her. But on the evening before their marriage, he gave her the wrong medicine, and she died. The most curious thing in the doctor's study was a big black book without any title. It was a book of magic. Once when a servant had tried to touch it, the skeleton moved in the closet, the portrait of the young girl moved on the wall, and many frightening faces appeared in the mirror. A small round table stood in the middle of the doctor's study. On the small table there was a beautiful vase. There were also 4 champagne glasses on the table.
My dear old friends,
said the doctor,
please help me with this experiment.
Now we must remember that Dr. Heidegger was a very strange old gentleman. When the doctor's 4 friends heard him talk about this experiment, they thought to themselves,
Oh, we will probably examine a cobweb under the microscope or some similar nonsense.
But this time Dr. Heidegger entered the study with the black book of magic. He opened it and took out an old rose which had been in the book for many years.
This rose,
he said,
is 55 years old. It was given to me by Sylvia Ward, whose portrait is on the wall. I wanted to wear it at our wedding. I have kept it in this book for 55 years. Now, do you think this rose can blossom again?
What nonsense!
exclaimed Widow Wycherley.
Can an old woman's face be young again?
Please look at this,
said Dr. Heidegger. He uncovered the vase and threw the rose into the water it contained. At first nothing happened. Then there was a change. The old brown rose began to change color. It became red. And its leaves became green. The rose was suddenly fresh and beautiful. The doctor's friends were indifferent because they had seen better experiments at the doctor's study. "Well, how did you do it?" one of them asked.
Did you ever hear of the Fountain of Youth?
asked Dr. Heidegger.
The Spanish explorer Ponce de Leon looked for it 2 or 3 centuries ago.
Did he ever find it?
asked Widow Wycherley.
No, because he didn't look in the right place. The famous Fountain of Youth is in the southern part of Florida. A friend of mine sent me the water you see in this vase.
Colonel Killigrew did not believe a word of the story and asked,
What does this water do to the human body? You will soon see,
replied Dr. Heidegger.
All of you are welcome to drink this water. Drink as much as you need to be young again.
He paused for a moment and then said,
I will not take part in this experiment because I do not want to become young again. I will only observe the experiment.
Part 2. The Fountain of Youth. Dr. Heidegger filled the 4 champagne glasses with the water of the Fountain of Youth. The water was effervescent and had a pleasant perfume. The 4 friends decided to drink it, although they did not believe in its magic powers. Dr. Heidegger looked at his friends and said,
Before you drink this water, remember the errors you made in your youth and do not repeat them. Now you are all old and you have learned from your errors.
The 4 friends laughed, but did not say anything.
We have experience now, and we will never make the same errors again,
they thought.
Please drink, then,
said the doctor. With trembling hands, they drank the water of youth. What a sad spectacle to watch! They were old and gray, and there was no life in their decrepit bodies. Suddenly a healthy color appeared on their gray cheeks. They looked at one another and saw that something was happening. They were slowly changing.
Give us more of that magic water,
they cried happily.
We are younger now, but we are still too old. Give us more,
cried Mr. Gascoigne.
Yes, give us more, more,
cried Mr. Medbourne.
Be patient,
said Dr. Heidegger, who was watching the experiment carefully.
It took you a long time to become old and decrepit. You certainly can wait 30 minutes to become young again.
He filled their glasses with more of the water of youth. In the vase there was lots of water for half of the old people in the city. The doctor's friends quickly drank their second glass. After a short time, their eyes became happy, and their white hair became darker. And now there were 3 middle-aged gentlemen and an attractive middle-aged woman sitting around the table.
My dear widow, you are lovely,
cried Colonel Killigrew, who was watching the changes on her face. However, the widow knew that Colonel Killigrew's compliments were not always true, so she ran to the mirror to look at herself.
I hope I don't see an ugly old woman in the mirror,
she thought to herself. The 3 gentlemen suddenly were exuberant. They felt excited, young, and full of energy. Mr. Gascoigne's mind began thinking about political matters. He started talking excitedly about patriotism and national glory. He was still a politician. Colonel Killigrew started singing a happy song while he admired Widow Wycherley's young, attractive body. He still liked the pleasures of life. Mr. Medbourne was working on a new business transaction. He wanted to sell ice to the East Indies.
What a clever idea,
he thought. I can use whales to transport the ice from the polar region to the East Indies. He was busy calculating dollars and cents. He was still a merchant. Widow Wycherley stood in front of the mirror and looked at herself. She was very surprised. Her face had become young and beautiful. Then she put her face close to the mirror to examine the color of her hair, which had become dark.
Now I can take off the cap I always wear to hide my white hair,
she thought. She felt very young and attractive, and even talked to the lovely image in the mirror. Then she went back to the table happily.
My dear old doctor,
she cried.
Please give me another glass of the water of youth.
Certainly,
replied the doctor.
I have already filled the other glasses, too.
It was almost evening, and it was getting dark in the study, but the vase with the water of youth shone with its own light. Dr. Heidegger sat in a big chair with a mysterious look on his face. After drinking the 3rd glass, the 4 friends were much younger. All the problems and illnesses of old age were forgotten. They felt like new people.
We are young! We are young!
cried one of the gentlemen. Now that they were young again, they laughed at their old clothes. One of them walked slowly across the room like a decrepit old man, and the others laughed. Another put on a pair of glasses and looked at the black book of magic, and again the others laughed. The third friend sat on a chair and imitated Dr. Heidegger. Then they all jumped happily around the room. Widow Wycherley, who was now a beautiful young lady, said,
"Doctor, come and dance with me."
The four young people laughed louder than ever.
Please excuse me, but I am old and I have rheumatism. I certainly cannot dance, but I am sure one of these young gentlemen will be happy to dance with you. Oh, dance with me, Clara!
Cried Colonel Killigrew.
No, I will dance with Clara!
Shouted Mr. Gascoigne.
Clara promised to marry me 50 years ago. I will dance with her,
said Mr. Medbourne. They all formed a circle around Clara. One gentleman took both her hands passionately, and another embraced her. The third put his hand under her cap and touched her hair. There was never a better picture of young rivalry. However, people said that the tall mirror on the wall showed the figures of 3 old gray men fighting over an ugly old woman. The 4 friends were young and full of passions. All 3 of the young gentlemen wanted the attention and the love of the young lady. The 3 rivals began to fight violently and became dangerous. As they fought, the small round table fell over. The vase with the water of youth fell over and broke. The precious water of the fountain of youth was all over the floor.
Gentlemen, Madam Wycherley, stop this fighting! Stop it immediately!
Cried the doctor. They stopped fighting and looked at Dr. Heidegger, who was sitting in his chair holding Sylvia's rose. Then they sat down because they were very tired.
My poor rose,
said Dr. Heidegger.
It is dying again.
As the 4 young friends looked at the rose, it became dry and brown.
But I still love it,
he said, and kissed it. His friends trembled. They felt a strange sensation in their bodies and spirits. What was happening to them?
Are we becoming old again?
One of them asked. Yes, they were becoming old again. The water of youth had had a very short effect. The old widow put her hands in front of her face. She was very unhappy.
Yes, my friends, you are old again,
said Dr. Heidegger.
And the water of youth is all over the floor. But I am not sorry, because I don't want to drink it. I don't want to become young again. You have taught me an important lesson.
But the doctor's friends did not agree with him. They decided to travel to Florida and drink from the fountain of youth at all hours of the day and night.